Hello, everyone. This was a little unexpected live, so sorry for not giving you any advance notice. But I wanted to come in today. I was trying to write something about World Mental Health Day and just had a hard time getting something out on my computer screen. So I decided I would do a live instead. So I've talked often about the people that I work with, survivors, being diagnosed, and how part of the difficulty in coming forward and sharing anything about being abused is the idea that as soon as you tell somebody that you have a history of abuse or assault, immediately they have an idea of your ability to function in the world. And that's a problem. It's a problem for a lot of reasons, and it really doesn't make me very happy that this is the reality that we live in. And I've talked often, many times over many years, about how the struggle that we experience as survivors isn't abnormal, and it's not a disorder, that it is a normal reaction to something incredibly abnormal, something traumatic, something that, particularly as a child, there's no way that you could have the capacity to process in a way that wouldn't leave you struggling. And so I've often talked about how people who have abuse histories come to me and we work together. And as they go through the healing process, as they begin to let go of the old beliefs, the shame, that they start feeling differently, that their struggle is different and often in many aspects really goes away for the most part. And the reason for that is because it's not that abuse creates mental illness. It's that we struggle because of the impact that the abuse has created in our lives. And so I've had people come to me with all different types of diagnoses, and some of the most common ones are bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder. Well, those are the two probably biggest ones. Well, depression and anxiety, of course, as well. But I think probably more than half of the people in our country and the world, possibly, not the world, but our country at least, are on some sort of depression or anxiety medication. Some of it needed, some of it I think is overprescribed. But anyway, hi Tracy, hi Rajana. Thank you for being here. So again, talking about the stigma of struggle for anybody, but especially as survivors, in honor of World Mental Health Day. So people that have come to me with all different types of diagnoses in our work together have been able to not struggle in the same ways that would make it as easy for somebody to diagnose them with those disorders. So certainly a lot of bipolar and even borderline personality disorder, as well as certainly depression and anxiety. But I even had somebody years and years ago who came to me with a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. And that's a pretty serious diagnosis that isn't curable. One could argue that it can be managed potentially with medication. But over the time in our work together, the symptoms that her physician or whoever saw and diagnosed her with that, those symptoms decreased. Those symptoms over time no longer existed for her. Not because she took medication, because she actually had stopped taking her medication a long time ago, and not because just magically it went away, she was able to release those symptoms because of the healing that she was able to do. Because in that healing, she no longer felt the need to self-protect. Within that healing, she was able to recognize that it made sense to grieve for a mother who she wasn't sure if she was alive or dead. And given the space and the opportunity to be able to do that, she no longer felt really compelled and a little obsessive about whether her mother was going to show up somewhere, or sometimes hearing her mother's voice at times when she was out in public. So I heard recently a gentleman named Paul Rykoff, who is the founder and CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. And I heard him say, and it's interesting that in all the training that I've had and all the experience that I've had, that it is somebody who is a veteran himself, who I believe probably has no actual psychological training, but he was responding to a man who recently took himself out of I believe it was a mayoral race in the Midwest. And he was a veteran as well, is a veteran. And he took himself out of the race because he was struggling with PTSD. And he acknowledged that. He talked about that as he took himself out of the race. And so Paul was speaking to that a little bit. And one of the things that he said that was so kind of profound to me was this. And I want you to hear this. Whatever you're doing, take a moment and listen to this for a moment. So he was talking about mental illness and kind of how courageous it was for this man to come forward and acknowledge that he had PTSD. And he said, PTSD is not an illness. It's not a disorder. It's an injury. An injury associated with his combat experience. And for anybody out there who is a survivor of any sort of childhood or interpersonal trauma, especially as a child, I really want you to take that in. And not just if you have a diagnosis of PTSD, but to really think about any struggle that you have, no matter what that looks like, whether it's incredibly profound and you have a hard time getting out of bed and you feel suicidal, or for people to look at you on the outside would never know that you struggle because you're really, really adept at keeping it hidden, because you've really grown accustomed to wearing that mask nearly every second of every day. Whatever your struggle looks like, take that in. I'm going to repeat it and really listen to this, because I want you to understand that your struggle is not about being weak. And for many of you, it's not even about having a mental health diagnosis, even if you have a mental health diagnosis. It's about the repercussions of an injury, of what you've experienced, and the impact that that's had on you. So please listen again. Struggle. It's not an illness. It's not a disorder. It's an injury. And an injury can be treated. An injury can heal. And that's what my work is about. It's what my message has always been about. That the struggle that we have as survivors doesn't mean that we are doomed for a life of struggle. It doesn't mean that we're weak or incapable of coping with things. It has never meant that. And I know that there are people out there who might suggest otherwise. And when a doctor labels you with a diagnosis, especially something that is about who you are as a person, like a personality disorder, and borderline is one of the huge ones, to know that it's not about who you are. It's about a natural struggle, the natural impact from an injury. And that injury for survivors is the abuse or the assault. It's the neglect. It's the betrayal. That is the injury that you've been affected by. And it's kind of interesting, and I didn't even think about this before, but you may have heard me talk about using a metaphor or analogy with how if you are in a horrible accident and you lose a limb, but you never really acknowledge the impact that has on you, or you never get it treated, how over time that's going to have a pretty significant impact on you, even if you find a way to navigate your life with that injury. So I have thought about abuse, being a survivor, as being injured. I've just never phrased it in such a clear and concise way as he did, which I thought was really powerful. And when you can recognize, when society can recognize that the struggles that survivors have, whatever that looks like, that it's a natural reaction to an injury. And that's really quite simply what it is. Now, I want to also say that I think that there's a time and a place for diagnosing. I think there's absolutely a time and place for medication. So I'm not suggesting that isn't the case. What I want you to understand, and what I want everybody to understand, is that being a survivor does not automatically equal PTSD. It doesn't automatically equal borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder or even depression or anxiety in terms of something that is diagnosable, or should be diagnosed, I guess I should say. Because as soon as you put a label on it, and again, I think there's a time and place, but as soon as you put a label on it, it creates this sense of powerlessness. When you're put on medication, automatically, when you tell somebody that you're a survivor, which I have seen that happen so many times, it makes you, even if subconsciously, it's telling you that this is just the way that it is. I can't tell you how many people I've known who have gone to their primary physician, and sometimes even a psychiatrist, but especially a primary physician, and shared a little bit about the fact that they struggle, or that they are a survivor, and they are just kind of automatically given a diagnosis, a really serious diagnosis, and put on sometimes multiple medications, and then sent on your way. A lot of doctors never even suggest counseling. I had a friend once who didn't have a history of abuse, but she struggled with depression and anxiety. And years before I knew her, she shared that with her physician. He put her on medication for depression, and that was it. And just saw her every so often to renew her prescription and sent her on her way. And I asked her, do you want to not feel this way? Because she still struggled, of course. And she said, well, This helps, and so I just plan on taking this. I said, did you ever think about going to see a counselor? Well, no, there really isn't anything to talk about. If you struggle with any type of depression or anxiety, or certainly PTSD, or if you've been diagnosed with a personality disorder, there is much to talk about in counseling. Please take what I'm saying from a place of hope for the struggle. That no matter what that struggle looks like, there is hope. And we ourselves as survivors are often just as guilty of automatically judging or labeling, having this idea that if somebody's been abused, then they can't function in the world. Or if anybody knew, they wouldn't want to be around them. Or certainly that if a partner knew, they would never want to be involved. We hold those ideas about ourselves. And so then when we hear them from somebody else, it reinforces that. And the only thing that that ultimately really does for us is create more hopelessness and more shame. So what if instead of thinking about, I was abused, so therefore I have this disorder or this diagnosis, what if instead we looked at it as an injury? And I know for many of you, it's not just once. It's not just for a brief period of time. It was many times over an extended period of time, often by multiple people, people that you should have been able to trust. So there's a lot of layers in the injury that you sustained, which means there's a lot of layers that you have to peel back in order to heal. And I know that that can be painful. And it is one of the times that I think that medication can have its place when you're working on trying to peel back those layers and healing all of those different pieces. Sometimes medication can be helpful in that because it helps you feel like you can be a little bit more present at times. It can help kind of take the edge off the extreme or the intensity of feeling that you might have. But the goal of any psychotropic medication is not really designed to be lifelong, unless you have something like schizophrenia or true bipolar disorder that is not something that is just about symptoms. But I've known far too many people that have been diagnosed for any number of reasons and put on all kinds of medicine, and just with the expectation that that's just what their life was going to be. And it's time for that to stop. And as people continue to come forward, I was both angry and happy when Christine Blasey Ford was talked about, and they kept referring to her as Dr. Ford. I was angry because it minimized, I think, the experience of people who do not have a doctorate, who are not white and wealthy and have this standing in the world. So that piece made me angry, that somehow because she was a doctor, she was more believable or more worthy of being heard. And I could go on about that. But at the same time, I think it was really, really beneficial for everybody, survivors and others, to be able to see that there is a woman who has had this experience, who was able to, isn't just the depiction of what we tend to see in the media, movies, books, whatever. She wasn't actively suicidal for years of her life. She wasn't tied to a bed in a mental hospital. She wasn't stalking somebody and homicidal. Because those are the images, those are the ways that survivors are often talked about. And that's one of the reasons why they're so easily dismissed, that we are so easily dismissed, that we're crazy. So to see somebody who kind of does have standing, who has gotten a degree in psychology, and I don't know exactly what she does with that degree. Obviously, she's a professor. I don't know. I think she does research, but I'm not sure what around. But I think that kind of helps reduce that a little bit too. Unfortunately, she was made out to be a liar and suggested that she didn't remember what she believed she remembered, which didn't help at all. But still, we need to speak about the reality of what it means to be a survivor and what a survivor looks like. And we look all kinds of ways. We're your neighbors, your siblings, your parents, and your children, your coworkers. We look like me. We look like Dr. Ford. We look like, and I'm sorry, I'm not remembering her name right now, the founder of metoo, the original founder of metoo. I'm almost positive she was a survivor. I could be wrong about that, I suppose. We look like everybody. We look like anybody. We look like your fathers and your sons. And we are not crazy. We are not damaged, or damaged goods is another way that I've heard so many survivors refer to themselves. Early on in my life, had I gone to a therapist, had I gotten the help that I would wish I could have gotten earlier, depending on who I would have gone to, there's no doubt that I would have been diagnosed. Probably with depression, possibly with PTSD, possibly with borderline personality disorder, possibly even with bipolar disorder. Because there were pieces of each of those things, for sure, anxiety. There were absolutely pieces of those things that I struggled with, sometimes quite significantly. The push-pull of borderline personality disorder, which, by the way, I don't actually believe in as a true diagnosis at all. It's no coincidence that over 90% of the people diagnosed with it have a history of childhood trauma. Certainly bipolar, the fluctuations in mood, being okay one minute and not okay the next minute, being kind of really happy connecting or in a relationship with somebody one minute and then being really pissed off and not wanting anything to do with them the next. Feeling so anxious and afraid that I couldn't breathe. Feeling like I could throw up. Not wanting to get out of bed, not being able to take care of my children in the way that they deserve to be taken care of. All of those things were struggles. And all of those things could have created a situation where I was diagnosed with all of those things potentially, and put on medication for all of those things. And again, if you didn't see the beginning of this, if you haven't heard me say this yet, I want to say again, it's not about suggesting that there isn't a time and place for a diagnosis or for medication. I think that there is absolute benefit in both of those things at times for certain people, but mostly for a period of time, not indefinitely. Because when you do the work, when you heal, the ways that you're injured, the ways that you cope with that injury change. And so the symptoms that led you to that diagnosis and needing that medication are no longer there. It's time that we release the stigma of all mental illness, but especially in this day and time, right now, with all the conversations around being a survivor, believing survivors, understanding why people don't tell. This is the time to take that power back, to release the shame that you hold around whatever way you may struggle. Instead of hiding the struggle, being able to acknowledge within yourself and maybe to others, yes, I struggle with this or I struggle with that. And have it be seen as a natural consequence to a tremendous, incredibly painful injury, and most often a significant betrayal. And the level of betrayal compounds the injury. So when you think about your struggle, particularly if you feel any shame, embarrassment around it, please take a breath and remind yourself that you're not weak. You're not a mental illness. You're not a disorder or a diagnosis. You've been injured. And so much of that struggle is about coping and honoring what you've done to survive. Honoring the ways that you learn to cope, even if as an adult they do not serve you well. Even if some of those things are self-sabotaging behaviors. You learn those as a child. As a child whose brain is not even fully developed, you are able in that moment, and probably all those moments afterwards, but in that moment, you had the capacity to find a way to survive. That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to feel incredibly proud of and empowered by, that you had the ability to do that without even having to think about it. There's absolutely no shame in that. And the fact that maybe you continue to do those things as adults or as an adult, which we all do, has no bearing on who you are. We all learn ways of coping as children, no matter what our histories are. Most of us are not taught. There's actually no discussions around how to cope. And so all of us learn in the only way that we can, that our mind kicks in, our body kicks in, and we find a way to deal with the difficult things that are going on, no matter what that is. When you are faced with abuse as a child, you have to come up with pretty intense and extreme ways of coping. And they serve their purpose. Again, that is not something to be ashamed of. And when I say be proud, I mean that. I mean that. Think about it. Think about having, as a child, no matter how old you were, on your own, because you probably didn't tell anybody, that you had the capacity within yourself, in your being, to find a way to get through that, to survive it, to get up the next day and go on with your life. And for the most part, doing it in a way that most people would have had no idea what was going on. The problem becomes that whatever way we learn to cope as children, we continue to use those same ways as adults. And I did a video on coping mechanisms. You can find that on YouTube. Maybe I'll share the link here if I remember. But we continue to use those same ways of coping in adulthood because we don't even recognize that we're coping. We don't recognize the things that we do when something difficult comes up because it's become such an automatic response. It becomes innate, almost as significantly innate as a survival mechanism, as instinct. So we use those same coping mechanisms as adults. So there's no shame in the ways that you struggle or the ways that you've learned to cope. If those ways do not serve you well as an adult, you can learn new ways, which would be much more beneficial to you. But there's no shame in struggle, and there's no shame in the ways that you learn to cope. So on World Mental Health Day, stand proud even just within yourself, knowing the capacity that you have within you to survive and to cope. Whether you have a diagnosis, whether you take medication, it doesn't matter. Just know that the struggle is natural. There isn't anybody alive who has been abused as a child in some capacity, in some way, who doesn't struggle as an adult. I can also tell you that there isn't anybody who has been abused as a child who has read a few self-help books or gone to a seminar and is completely healed. It doesn't work that way. I wish that it did. So don't compare yourself to those people who tell you that I healed because I prayed. I healed when I read this book. Or even going to a retreat. There's a lot of healing that can happen in a really great retreat. There's a lot of healing that can happen in that. But that certainly doesn't give you all the healing that you need because it takes time. It takes months, it takes years of ongoing practice. So please don't compare yourself to other people. Please don't compare where you're at in your struggle with where I'm at. I began this journey, oh my goodness, a long time ago. I don't know, 25 years ago or something, I don't know. Like really began the journey 25 years ago. Going to counseling and then going to school and going to school, getting my degree in social work and psychology and sociology and getting my master's degree. That was hugely profound in my healing. And then of course, just the personal work that I was doing, and then of course the work that I was doing with survivors has also been hugely profound in my process as well. So please don't compare yourself to where I'm at. Don't ever think that you should be where somebody else is. For one thing, you don't know what they're struggling with behind that mask. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And you don't know what their journey has been. So no stigma, no comparing, standing proud in what you've done to cope and survive. We're in this together. The shame is not ours. The shame of being abused, the shame of struggle, not ours. so Tracy says it's a lifelong injury. I think that so this is how I think about it. It leaves a lifelong scar, but I think the injury itself heals. And I don't know if that seems like there's a difference there or not, but in my mind there is. Because to me, when I think of an injury, it's something that still needs a lot of attention. We need to make sure it doesn't get infected. We need to make sure that it's getting the wound care that it needs. And once that wound heals, which is to me what healing abuse is about, once that wound heals, you may still have a scar. That scar isn't likely going to go away, but the injury itself has healed. It's been treated with compassion, with the type of tools that are needed for it to heal. A scab forms, and that's the process of a lot of the healing that happens. There's that scab, and sometimes that scab falls off, and it needs to form a new scab. Like that's kind of this process of healing. But I believe that there does come a time, and I say this based on my personal experience, as well as so many of the people that I've worked with over the years, that yes, that scar will be there. You will always know that it existed. You might look at it at times, or you might get it bumped and be reminded, sometimes in not such a pleasant way. But it doesn't tear that scab off, because there's a scar that's been created to protect you. And that's really what this healing process is. It's about tending to that scar over and over and over and over again until that scab has had the time that it needed to create that new growth underneath, for those cells to come together, to band together, to create new tissue, so that the scab is no longer needed. I know sometimes I go off in very strange places. Well, Jenny, I'm happy that helped you. I don't know what that was that I said. I'm sorry, but I'm glad that it was helpful. Yes, Radhana, this has been one of my, I think probably more in probably the first like 10 years or so of doing this work. I really struggled a lot with people coming to me with diagnosis, multiple diagnoses sometimes. And particularly if it was given by a psychiatrist. With a family physician, I know that they don't really, and I'm not trying to talk down a family physician or a general practitioner, but they really don't have any training in mental health. And most of the training that they do get, or most of the education that they get, is from pharmaceutical companies. So it's been a struggle. And I've had a lot of clients who are so incredibly fearful of considering the possibility of coming off of medication. But the reality is that depending on what the medication is, it can be hard to do all the healing that you need to do if you're numbed out. And so I said medication has its place, I think, at times, but it's for a period of time. Because when you're healing, part of what you have to be able to do in healing is to feel, is to connect your mind and your body, to be in a place where you can have the awareness of what are those triggers and how are those triggers showing up. And if you're numbed out by medication, that's really difficult to do. And I definitely think even there's a lot of trauma therapists that I've known who who don't really talk about healing. They talk about symptom relief. And I think that's a huge problem too. And one of the difficulties, honestly, that I have with EMDR as well is that EMDR is really about symptom relief. It's not so much about healing the underlying wound. It's almost like if you go back to that scab example, it's finding ways to almost kind of avoid the scab in a sense, not working at bringing those cells together to create the new tissue underneath it. Not saying that that's always the case, but often. So things that treat symptoms can be helpful and maybe really helpful for a period of time. Same with like tapping. Tapping is, some people find it helpful for symptom relief. It's kind of an acute symptom kind of relieving thing, but it doesn't heal the underlying wound. And that's, I think, what has really been missing in the field of working with survivors of trauma. I think people are starting to get that a little bit more, but that's definitely been something that has kind of been missing. Yes. Tracy says, I am Dr. Ford. Yeah, me too. Even, well, I guess I was about a year younger when something somewhat similar kind of happened. Yeah. Yeah, Rodana, I'm glad that that resonated for you. Hey, Pam. It is a real ebb and flow. Yes. Yes. And that's such an important thing for anybody who's struggling to be able to really recognize. And it's hard to recognize that when you haven't really experienced how you can move through that and still come back. But to recognize that is what healing is. You can't have true healing without the ebb and flow, without the feeling that you're doing really well and then feeling challenged again. It's just not possible, because we build on those times that we challenge or that we feel challenged. We build on the ebb. It gives us an opportunity to kind of strengthen those muscles, so to speak. Yes, Rodana, exactly. I'd actually love to hear where you heard that, because that's actually very similar to how I talk about it as well, in terms of like the mountain and climbing up and taking, making camp for a couple of days or a week or whatever you need, but you just start from there, that it's not going back. I actually might have talked about it, Rhoda, in the video that I did. Hi, Katie. Are there alternatives to EMDR? It's not working for me. Katie, first of all, you're not alone. I've known many people over the years, not even just childhood trauma survivors, but who find that EMDR ultimately doesn't necessarily help a whole lot in healing childhood trauma. In fact, it can sometimes create more difficulty. So first of all, you're not alone in that. It's not like it works for everybody else, but it's not working for you. So in terms of alternatives to EMDR, there isn't anything that I could suggest that is designed to be kind of a quick or relatively quick process of healing trauma. Because as I was saying just a few moments ago, healing childhood trauma is a process. It's not about being able to sit with a memory and not be affected by it. In fact, before I was ever really healing, I had memories. I had very clear memories, and I could sit with them all day long. and not be significantly affected by them. I could talk about them and not be affected by it. In fact, one of the therapists the first actual therapist that I went to in my healing, I was sharing with her, I think, just various abuse experiences, or the fact that I had different perpetrators, and just kind of going through the list. And she said, I don't remember the whole thing that she said, but what stood out to me was, she said, I almost feel like I'm listening to a news reporter just share the news with me. And I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm just reporting on my experience. And I realized that I had always been able to do that. And kind of one of the goals in EMDR is to not be reactive, to not be affected by memories and triggers. And so for me, and other survivors too, it's not so much that, like, the long-term impact isn't so much about being triggered and not being able to manage. That can happen for sure. But the reason that we have the long-term impact isn't really because of that. It's because of what we believe about ourselves as a result of the abuse. And no technique, so to speak, is going to heal that. Because the process is a process of deprogramming. It's no different than being brainwashed and having to go through a process of deprogramming, and the complexity of that and the difficulty in that. I also talk about it in the sense of what you're healing when you're healing abuse is the meaning that you've attached to it, what you believe about yourself as a result of the abuse. So you believe the things that you believe about yourself because of the abuse, which are not true. And healing is about letting that go and being able to believe in what is true, what has always been true, that you are worthy, that you're not at fault, and lots of other things. But doing that, going through that process of letting these beliefs go and creating space to believe in what is true is much like deprogramming, as I said, but it's also much like trying to change somebody's religious beliefs. Somebody who is devout their entire life, like believes so strongly in their religious ideas and values, like they just believe it because it's part of their being. They don't even know why they believe it, they just believe it. Trying to get them to believe in something completely different than that is hard. They're going to hold on to those beliefs with every part of their being because it's scary to let go of that. And so letting go of that and learning to be open to something different is an incredibly complex process. And it's layer by layer by layer. And so if you're really struggling with symptoms, one is, I think, a therapist who really has a lot of expertise in working with survivors of childhood trauma, aside from doing EMDR. So even if they do EMDR, do they do a lot of other things to heal childhood trauma? But somebody who has a lot of experience in childhood trauma, that's the first thing. In addition to that, and maybe that person would hopefully suggest these things as well and help you with it, meditating, breath work are really, really powerful. And I know it seems like you want something to do. Like people say, okay, tell me what to do and I'm going to do it. And meditating feels like the opposite of doing something. But it is doing something. It's practicing being present. And when you are present, you're not feeling all of these other things. Because the feelings, the fears, the worry, the sadness, the grief, the panic, all of those things that we feel are because we're thinking about the past and feeling badly about it, or we're worrying about the future and afraid of it. That's where 99.9% of our struggle comes from, no matter who we are. And so when we can practice being present, meaning that we're in this moment, then we're not feeling the past. We're not fearing the future. And I know it's hard to meditate. It feels hard to meditate. It's actually not hard to meditate, but it feels really hard to meditate. I have difficulty meditating. I talk about it all the time. I create meditations, but I get that it's hard to feel and stay present. But even just taking moments here or there to be present can help. Those who have taken Journey to Understanding or Journey to Wholeness, right now we are in Taking Root, which is about grounding and breathing. Being present is such a big part of that. Focusing on your breath, even for just a few breaths, can help break that momentum of the intensity of feeling that's there. So just taking a full breath and counting to yourself as you breathe in, a full deep breath. Don't force it, don't pass out, like don't try to take too deep of a breath, but just taking kind of a natural breath, but letting it fill your lungs and your belly. Counting to yourself as you breathe in and pausing just for a brief second at the top of that breath. And then breathing out at the same pace. So counting to yourself at the same pace as you exhale. Maybe even taking a second or a count longer as you exhale. Just doing that for about 3 breaths can help. And the more you practice it, the more helpful it becomes. The more you practice it when you're not feeling a lot, the more helpful it becomes. So, and if you're not sure where to search for a therapist that has expertise in working with survivors of childhood abuse, aside from techniques, I would encourage you to check out your local rape crisis center. They are typically very well trained in what it means to be a survivor of abuse. And they can also provide referrals to people in the community as well. So you can check that out. So this video ended up being way longer than I anticipated, but thank you all for being here. I want to go through this again just to check. Oh, the inner voice of love. I've never heard of that. Thank you. Yeah, Jenny, and certainly the person doing it makes a difference in how much training they have and how much experience they have. And there is a difference between doing EMDR with somebody who is, for example, a combat veteran versus somebody that has a history of childhood trauma. And what I have found in my experience is that it tends to be more beneficial for people that have a more recent or an adult trauma, not trauma over a long period of time, especially as a child. And incorporating pieces of it within the work as a whole, I think tends to work better as well. Hi, Dawn. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for just being a part of my community. Thank you for being here, because your presence and your energy helps everybody else who follows, even if they're not on these videos, even if they're not commenting. It helps everybody know that they're not alone. And that matters. It matters in such a huge way. So thank you all for being here. If you're watching this on the replay, please let me know. Especially if you're watching it to the end, I really want to thank you. So let me know that you're watching this on the replay at the end, because I would like to honor your presence here as well. So thank you everybody for being here. Take care of yourself. Remember, there is no shame in struggle, and it is an injury and not an illness. And let me thank Paul Rykoff again for that statement. So thank you everybody. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Bye.